so I have brainstormed some ideas. It's convenient to have a full set of hole saws. You'll need that not only for cutting the holes, but also for some guides. This is not straight, so it's not one I use, but basically just used a piece of 2x4 scrap, put a 2-inch hole, cut into it, because the hole that's on the stock pipe is a 2-inch hole. Cut it off with the saw, and then tapered it on the sander so that it would bevel in, tap it in with a hammer, make sure it's nice and straight. That's why I use a hole saw, so it's nice and straight. It goes in on its own very straight, and then you can use a drill bit to verify that it is in straight. I then took a larger size drill bit than the bit that comes on the hole guide, made it hole larger, and used an aluminum foil tape to wrap around the drill bit so that it would spin freely in there as a guide without cutting up the wood. I then loosened the bit and extended it out as far as I could absolutely get it to go and lock in, so that when I go to drill this hole, I am going straight in down the center axis of the exhaust pipe at a nice straight, and have a guide so that it will stay centered and cut evenly, because the the shape will actually engage on one side first before it finally makes its full cut all the way through, at which point this plug with its piece will come out with the tube that's inside that goes forward and turns off to the side, the first layer of baffles. Now I have started off by wrapping my exhaust pipes in paper. I happen to have large pieces of paper, blueprint plans, any kind of paper would work. Just covered the chrome so that it would hopefully not get damaged. And I've been working on this for a while. Got my plugs in on both pieces, getting ready to do my initial drilling. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to just freehand hold these, or if I'm going to come up with some way to put a block and bolt through the holes, the mount holes, to hold this thing steady while I drill the end and make my initial cuts into the end of the pipe before I move on to other methods I have devised for removing the baffles that are inside. Anybody who's ever looked at pictures of these, there are 3 tubes inside this that start on this side, go all the way up. There's a baffle plate here and a baffle plate here. These tubes connect all the way up to there. Adds a lot of weight. More of the restrictor plates, some holes in there, and then there's perforated wire, or rather perforated steel with fiberglass mat wrapped around on the inside of the exterior steel tube as a sound dampening. I'm going to leave that intact. I'm going to not knock out the baffle plates that are inside, as a lot of people have suggested and done with brute force. I'm going to remove, or attempt to remove, the tubes that go the entire length of the piece out completely, and then leave the baffles in place so that there is some air restriction, so that there's not a complete loss of back pressure, and then we'll see how it sounds. And if it sounds good, then I will switch back from my short pipes that I had put on when I got the bike, which have a good sound, but they're not really quite as loud as I want. And because I'm about to put bags on the bike, I'm looking forward to having the pipes longer and full length of under the bags, and move that sound further back. Alright, so I think I'm ready to try a cut. I use the scrap blocks I happen to have for making the plugs for the ends to make an anchor, not so much to keep it from moving around, but to keep it from rotating under the torque of the saw blade trying to grab a hold of it so that it doesn't spin on me. I'm going to attempt to set the camera where I can record the drilling process, and I am going with a 3-inch cup to take out the 2-inch hole that's there and leave a good size opening here. I'm going to use a clip. I don't really have any fancy mounts. We'll see how it comes out so far as recording the process itself. Wish me luck. Progress so far, because I'm cutting straight in, it's going across an angled piece, it's wearing away material. I'm going to stop the camera and see what my video so far looks like, because it's vibrating the table quite a bit. Then I'll continue. Voila! There's my plug. So, you can see my plug wedged into a piece. Nicely cut. And I gotta say I'm pretty happy with the hole and how centered it is. Now I'm thinking I'm going to pop my plug out and move it to the next tube to then continue my centralized cut to remove that elbow piece out and expose the tubes that are behind it. Alright, so pop my plug out and I have inserted into the next baffle, tapped it in with a hammer, and I am again using a drill bit to attempt to verify that it is in as straight as I can get it for the next guide. And we'll move on, and as we go on I'll show you the other tools that I have collected specifically for this task. Getting this hole saw in may be a challenge, so one of the little beauties I picked up is an extension that is a 3/8 inch made by Milwaukee extension. I don't know if I'm going to quite need it here yet, but I've got it just in case. Orientation is a little different because again I'm using my block, but because of the rotation of the drill, it just means that I'm basically a 90-degree turn further back. I'll do my best not to let that affect anything. I have already, as done previously, verified with a drill bit that I am as straight as I can get with this plug. Before I start drilling, I will again attempt to record the process, but it is shaking the table quite a bit, so the camera moves around some while I'm doing this. We'll see what happens. Almost the same.
Yeah.
It just didn't go in quite right. It was in low and then it popped up and started cutting, so I had to go back to the original cut. Which looks a little rough right there, but
Yeah, but you can file all that down and make it look nice.
I've just got a barrel sander. Push the plug in further. So in order to drive it in, I used without a hub and just tapped it in with a hammer to get it in far enough for the cup to be able to engage the surface inside without bottoming out on the plug. Doing alright, Jamie?
Yeah.
Help holding it down, Big Jamie. Damn. Damn sure it's not hitting that fucking plug.
What just happened?
Punch through. It's cut all the way through. But something, yep, there's a piece off to the side. So the elbow has a ring around it that's attached in 4 points that I had to use a free flashlight to see where I use the hacksaw to cut the tabs off to finally break it free. Okay, so stopped last night. I had help holding this, and you can see where I was reaming out the pipes down their length to get rid of them, but it's taking a lot longer than hoped, so I'm going to do my other option. Was I originally planning on putting holes in this, but because these are kind of connected, I think I'm going to punch a single saw hole with its center sort of based around that little point there, more or less the middle, to gain access to the upper part of the tubes where I can go to what I had as a plan B from the start, and that is to use a flexible Dremel extension cord to cut away. Now, yeah, it's flexible. I'm going to put it through a tube or a pipe, probably cut that old handle apart, mop handle apart, stick it through it so it's rigid enough for me to control with a cutting wheel and cut off those tubes, which will leave what is visible from the top. Do this one since it's not screwed down. And that is, it's hard to see on the camera and the flashlight and all these things going together. There are the tops of the 3 tubes and then one larger tube. So while I was using this tapered hole saw on the extension to ream out these tubes and make it past the first plate, quite a bit of friction, obviously. The thing got hot. I had to stop a number of times, and the trick I was using was a bucket of water, spinning it to cool it down, keep it from overheating, make better progress. While the tubes themselves cut better as they get hot, as they soften, there's always the risk of damaging the cutting edge, so you want to keep that cool while you're working that. So don't remember if I think I did mention this last night. This angle piece that's attached in right here has a curve on it, has a centralizing ring with 4 tabs on it, and because I didn't really want to break anything and tapping didn't really seem to make much of a difference very quickly, I ended up taking a hacksaw blade off of its handle and just cutting through those tabs by hand. Now, because of the odd angles and whatnot, Some of the tabs were left a little bit longer than the others. They were in the way of the hole saw continuing on down the pipe, so I'm going to have to bend them back out of the way. Leaving this ring here also enables you to leave the perforated fiberglass impregnated mat around the outside, because that's actually what is retaining it. And then I've noticed this morning after all this that while I don't see where I've caught or damaged it and pulled the fiber out, but some of the fiberglass that was right up in here, you see in those little joints right there, switch to right in there, you can see the edges of the fiberglass mat were apparently, I guess from the process of putting it in, we're at the edge left inside, and because the airflow restrictions never really got blown out, so I pulled those out, but it doesn't appear to be from me damaging the mat. Goal being to leave that ring in there to hold all that in place and provide some back pressure. Okay, so last night everybody come over to quote watch, and I didn't think I was going to need help because I figured, oh, no problem, this will keep it from turning. But you apply a lot of pressure down this way trying to make it cut faster, unfortunately, and he ended up more or less holding it down to keep it from jumping up in this manner. But he also said I was pushing this way and I'd need a block, so with his recommendation I have used another one of the pieces of scrap from making the plugs, screwed it to the table here so that when I apply pressure here, it tries to swing this way, it's met with resistance to keep it from moving around. If I were to apply a lot of torque, it probably would still try and lift up on this pipe because the braces on this side in order to keep the bevel this direction so I have the best access. Do the other side, the plate comes off on this side, the block's on this side, so it actually turns itself into the counter. And I have a feeling that part of that is the reason why when I started to do the initial drilling, it was going in nice and straight, and it jumped, changed angles, and started cutting a second line. I had to come back and recut, and that's why I ended up with this jagged roughness here. But really, it's still just not pretty. This metal got bent back out of the way and not cleanly cut. I'll come back in with the hole with a barrel sander when I do both sides and clean this up, make it nice and pretty, and give us a much cleaner edge here, and try and balance the two pipes so that they are the same. But that will be later on down the road. For now, it's just an inconvenience and a slight hazard. Alright, in order to be able to see down in there and get my next hole, cutting that center section out nice and even, you can't see where the guide drill bit is for with the cup on, and you can't see where the bit is with the oversized locking chuck is because it's still too big. I switched to the other center coal guide hole saw. It's a narrow profile so that I can see where the tip is when I center it. I'm going to use it to punch my guide hole and pull it out and switch over to the cup and finish the cut to make that centralized opening and try and keep everything nice and in line with these holes I've already put the effort into making straight, and leaving these restrictors as baffles like on a silencer. Anyway, that's the next step. I have punched my guide hole that I will then use to use the same 3-inch hole saw to cut that section to the left there out, thereby making one large hole, gaining me access to the other ends of those tubes to cut them with a Dremel. So even with the guide hole, it was still difficult to see what I was doing or get the bit into the hole, so I had to extend the bit out quite a bit to get more room to work with and find the hole. But ta-da! Now, just a very large hole, and I can actually see light on the other end of the tunnel. Finally, get a better idea of how much pipe is left and what it's going to take to get down there with the Dremel, how much space I've got to work with a cutting wheel, etc., to cut the ends of these pipes out of the way. I used the two extensions together to push the shrapnel from the ends of the pipes out of the way to get a better view of what we're doing. And my goal is to go to the store and get some cutting wheels and use a Dremel to cut off those 3 tubes basically at the same length as the larger tube off to the side, and we'll see where we can get from there. That would be, at my point, in my opinion, pretty much done at that point. Then it's clean this thing up after I cut the other one to make it the same way and make these things pretty again and see what she sounds like. Alright, so this is what I rigged up. I took a Swiffer, I believe, handle. I cut the threaded portion off and I reamed out the plastic inset that was left so that the shaft of the flexible Dremel tool would fit through it. I then cut off I cut off the handle to the right length so that I could slide this down from there. Now I made it to where the end stuck out some, and that allowed me to tension the cable inside, pull it out, and wrap electrical tape around the shaft so that when it relaxed and tried to pull back in, it would wedge into the plastic and hold it in place, keep it from wiggling around, and that keeps the entire thing in a nice long rigid tool. Now, yeah, it's a lot longer than I realistically need, but then I would have been dealing with the extension flexed and curled, having to set the Dremel on something, and the extension wiggling around in the end of the tube, potentially getting damage from the metal edge. This way, I have one very long tool. This should hopefully be tension enough to hold the Dremel in place on the end of this. If not, I'll put a little stick or something to brace it to keep it stiff so that I can hold and choke up on the pole down here to proceed to cut the inside of those from the inside the tubes, to cut them off and free them to complete the debaffling of this exhaust pipe. Well, it was a real bitch, but I eventually got all 3 pipes all the way out, more or less mangling them, knocking them free, breaking their welds, cutting them, twisting them so that they sheared off. Whatever it took to get the piece that was on the other side of the baffle short enough to fall around the corners and out the hole. A pile of debris on the floor. That's one. I just hope the next one goes faster, because this was a real pain. Hopefully it's really worth it. Drilling up hole number 2. This is the pipe I started on, went over to the other one to drill the end out, and now I'm coming back to this one after I've gutted the first, rather the second one I started on. Alright, cut around the plug tube. It's still freestanding because of the 4 tabs. You can see one right there poking through, and at the top holding this piece, and at the bottom, and then over there on that side. I'll have to cut those by hand with a hacksaw blade to free that out. Alright, so got that out of the way, and now we're back to this issue. Now, last time I reamed those down from the top, they got mangled. It took a long time. This time I'm going to try cutting them with the Dremel above the baffle, breaking off the end, and then reaming that short distance till it gets through the plate. trying to cut time out of things that took a while previously. Okay, so what I've ended up doing is switching to the small hole saw. That happens to be just the same diameter as the tube itself.
Yep.
You can stick it into the end of the taper funnel and it will cut the taper off, exposing the tube to the right diameter so that we can then auger down the distance of that and through the plate, just saving time. Here's the problem with the Dremel. The Dremel's disc is not big enough to cut through all three of these tubes because, well, you can't get around them. All you can do is get to one side of them. Now, like I did with the other piece, occasionally grinding or trying to ream them out with a tapered drill bit would grab a hold of it and spin it, and it would shear at the cut from the Dremel, even though it wasn't all the way through, knocking off a big chunk, which eventually led to me getting pieces small enough to knock the welds loose and have them just slide out of the last baffle. Here I have used the smallest hole saw to cut the funnel off. Then I go with the taper bit for a while, go back with the hole saw, rip off the chunks, getting it down to the baffle so that I can use the whole taper hole drill bit to finally perforate both the tube and the baffle in this section where all the holes reunite, and then I will take a 3-inch saw and cut the remaining section out, at which point I'll progress on to cutting and sectioning the tubes down and out of the way until I can finally break tubes out free of the last baffle. So it's just a slow process of grind some, cut some, grind some, cut some, take pieces out a little bit at a time. The other issue that I am encountering is that, well, my drill is getting hot from all this constant going, so on top of having to use water to keep the taper bit cool from the going down the tubes, I'm also now using a fan in between on the drill overall. The fan blade that's on it only kind of helps, but when it's at top speed, when really top speed is not the best place for that bit to cut, so it's slowing down the process a little bit just to make sure I don't burn out my drill. Getting through that first baffle. Just getting to reproduce full penetration with the taper through that baffle before I cut the large portion on the left out is an arduous task. This is no simple thing to do it this way. And repeatedly going in with my Dremel extension cutting tool, I eventually knocked the plastic bit out, pushed the handle over to one side, bent and contorted the steel so that it was on one side and I could get closer to the pieces I'm cutting, this slight offset, than I could when it was perfectly straight. And I'm just get in there and I cut off little bits and pieces, make it go faster. In order to speed up the removal of the pipes this time around, I've gone to a combination of things, and that is one, an old chisel I was willing to sacrifice on a long pipe, copper, yes, but still works. 2, the taper bit, and 3, excuse me, the hole saw that is, I think, 3/4 inch. So this one tends to flare the shrapnel off to the side. So I've been using this one to split the pipe down the side, which makes this open it up faster. And then this is just exactly the diameter of the steel pipe. So when it flares out, then that helps hold this in the middle, and it cuts a ring separating all the flared pieces and they drop off. Rinse, repeat. Split the sides, one on each side so it goes faster. Ream it for a while, that removes some material and flares it out. come back and saw to chop the bits and pieces off, and it is a slow process and leaves lots of shrapnel behind, but it's getting there. Alright, so I spent a lot of time reaming out and grinding, reaming and grinding, reaming and grinding, till, unfortunate, at least from the time, one of the tubes broke free. The welds broke free. I was trying not to break them free because then it's very difficult to grind and cut on. However, push come to shove, I decided to take my extension, and with it in the drill, I put it to a disc sander, stationary disc sander, and ground a slight taper to the end, because I was already aware that this was basically the same size as the tube, and that when it was flared from the process of using the tapered hole saw, that this would fit into the funnel that was left behind. So because I put a slight taper on this and I took the little nut out, then I was able to then hammer this into the tubes that I had already broken them all free because I'd given up on trying to grind them out. And then once I was able to do that, I was able to turn the tubes and cut them with the Dremel saw, because unfortunately none of the Dremel saw blades will cut all the way through them from a fixed position, but once you can turn them, yay, you can cut them more. And then I put the drill back on and cranked it, and the first one sheared at the cuts, and the second one I just managed to apparently wedge it in there hard enough that when I was pulling on it trying to get it to shear off, it pulled the welds through the hole. That's 2 down. I've only got 1 more, and then voila, I'm done. Yay. Ta-da! Success! We are debaffled. Okay, so I have used a Dremel and a drum sander and done my best to round out the holes. I know they're not perfect, but can I say, I don't think I can get them perfect. You start chasing high spots and you just make them low spots on the sides of them because you can't keep it controlled, but whatever. Alright, so I've done my best to round out the holes, get rid of any uneven sections. Some of this I'm not going to be able to make disappear. I could probably sand them a little bit more, but more or less I'm just going to count on the fact that they're going to be hidden by black and paint, and I've cleaned all the gumminess from the tape off, and I'm about to do a taped edge and do prep to spray black high temperature paint to cover this, and then also get all the interior visible portions blacked out so that it looks a little bit better, and we're done. Next thing is to put them on the bike, try and shoot some video, maybe of the shorty pipes the way they sound now, and then with the long pipes, and make a judgment call as to whether or not I like it. I'll do my best to figure out how to deal with the small microphone on the cell I'm doing all these recordings on. I hit them with black. Spread them back as far as I could get the paint. Basically the first ring. Just didn't want to see anything that wasn't black from, you know, say that angle or whatever. Just waiting for them to dry. Fan blowing on them. About to start the bike. I don't know, maybe potentially one last time with the shorties on it. Try and shoot a recording. See if I can successfully pick up the sound without just totally destroying the microphone and making it sound like crap on a recording. Here's my baby. When I got her, had the backrest and the shorties put on, air filter, alarm, had it remapped. Wife gave me a Father's Day gift later on down the road of a windscreen, and then here recently for the Lone Star Rally I always wanted to use that accessory switch. came up with a light and a mount to put the light bar on, and then of course changed out the headlights for these aftermarket LEDs. Let me tell you, man, this thing's bright all on. I got more than 5,000 lumens, and it is night time, day to night, rather night to day, I should say. So turn these lights on, off, and turn it over. Here they are, completely unwrapped. Actually, nice chrome. Got a clean little goop off from the tape. So I'm in the process of taking off the shorty pipes that were on there, and boy, what a difference. And then discover that the front clamp, the welds are, well, shitty, broke, like so many things. I guess vibration. To figure that out if I actually go back with it, because this is typical with I guess they're well done exhaust systems. It broke. Had the rather it's decorative on both sides pop off from vibrations. When this one came off, I went back like, oh, it's sorry, it's past warranty. It's like a month passed, 2 months passed. If you had reported it sooner, I'm like, it took me forever to even figure out what the vibration was. And of course, it came off on freeway speeds. It's not like I had to try and figure out how to put it off. It vibrated and popped off at freeway speeds, and then the other side came off, what, in November at the rally in Galveston. I found an aftermarket aluminum piece that has this sort of appearance. It can go in there and hide it on Fast Eddie's website. Maybe someday, but yes, I still have the original cat on there. It's not something I want to monkey around with just yet. We'll see someday, but right now we're going to see how this sounds. Alright. They're on. It's been so long since I've seen these pipes on the bike. I forgot just how wide those exhausts are, but they'll look nice once I have saddlebags over the top of them. Not that they don't look nice now. Okay, so because I wasn't 100% convinced these are going to work the way I wanted, and I kind of rushed in, a little bit of the dremeling from hitting this edge caused some scuffs, so to speak, in the paint. And I figured, oh well, I'll pull it off and repaint it. And also because, well, in my eagerness, I never bothered to turn it over without the pipes on just to see what it sounds like. So, here we go. Surprisingly, it's really quite quiet because of the catalytic converter. But I can already tell that my mufflers still have enough backflow to stop that deceleration pop, which is extremely pronounced considering the bike is parked right now and not even moving. I will clean up my ends, repaint them, put it all back together, and hopefully finally find the time to properly paint these things start to finish and get it all put back together. Okay, so I've had the bags on a while. Today is the day of the second day of the Houston freeze. Look how nice that looks. Pipes come all the way back. Instead of, they would have ended right about there. But since I've had time to run the bike, let the computer adjust and such, I will now